Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 is an upcoming action role-playing video game that is being developed by Hardsuit Labs and Paradox Interactive and published by THQ Nordic. The original title was released back in 2004, and back in 2019 a sequel was teased and then officially announced. Since then, the title has faced multiple delays and high-profile staff losses during development, but that hasn't stopped the development process and the game still moving forward. So let's break down the development history, gameplay details, and delays. As always, all the sources will be linked in the description down below, so make sure to check those out and support those original writers. And with that out of the way, let's get into everything we know about Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. The studio working on the project, as I said, is a combination of Hardsuit Labs and Paradox Interactive. Hardsuit Labs is a relatively new studio that formed back in 2015, but that doesn't mean the studio has limited experience. In the studio's short time being active, they have worked on the Killing Floor series, the BioShock collection, and some of the Gears of War franchise. Now, the original studio who developed Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines could not return because the studio was actually shut down in 2005, shortly after the release and then failure of the original game. The original game had also faced many development problems and changes in staff throughout the creation, which led to a rushed product and a lackluster launch for the title. And it was reported that only 72,000 copies were originally sold for the title in the first month in the United States, which was a major factor as to why Activision initially shut down the studio, even though the game has went on to have decent lifetime sales through digital distribution and has gathered a cult status among many fans. And this, for the most part, should cover most of the background information you need to know about the title moving forward. Next, we have to jump all the way up to March of 2019 when Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 was officially announced. The team stated the project had already been in development for multiple years, and they were finally ready to announce the game. The team tapped Brian Mitsoda to write the game itself because he was credited as the original writer on the first game, and they promised fans could see returning characters from earlier in the franchise. And the initial release window the team promised was for Q1 of 2020 on consoles and PC, which clearly did not end up happening. But at the time, it seemed like everything was progressing normally for the title. 3 months after the announcement in June of 2019, a gameplay trailer was shown off at E3 and gave a pre-alpha look at some of the vampire abilities, story elements, choices, weapons, and how the third-person action would be mixed with the first-person perspective. And at this time, a Q1 2020 release was still being promoted. 4 months after that trailer, in October of 2019, the development team formally announced that although they had been working on the title for over 3.5 years, the title would still not be ready for the Q1 2020 window, and instead the team wanted to push back the date to later in 2020. They were especially cautious of launching the game before it's ready, due to the problems the first title faced when it was launched too early, and when that faced pushback from fans and critics. So this time around they wanted to avoid that altogether and basically release the game when it's done, which they thought could also be in later 2020. And for the most part, the team was quiet for an entire year until August of 2020. There were some other development posts the team had on their website, but they've seemingly removed almost all of them. So for the sake of this video, the plans and ideas could have changed, which is why I'm not going to cover anything that was removed from the official website, and I'm going to stick with confirmed news. So there are more development posts that were out there, and they did do interviews, but a lot of it is just rehashed information, so not covering any of that in the scope of this video. But in August, the team announced that the lead narrative designer and creative director had not only left the project, but the studio altogether. And in response to this, the team announced they brought in a new creative consultant to fill the creative director role, and will fill the role leading into the final stages of development. And after this, a lot of fans were cautious that such high-profile members of the team were leaving when the game was seemingly very close to release, and fans speculated if this could mean there were bigger development problems we weren't seeing or the team wasn't communicating. And for the most part, that was never confirmed, it was just speculation based on the job losses and the state of the game itself. It was also in August of 2020 that the team posted on Twitter that the initial release date for the game was moving again, this time out of late 2020 and now sometime in 2021. They once again echoed the earlier comments that to create the game fans expect, they need more time to craft this experience and will have more to share in the coming months about the actual launch. And for the most part, that is a lot of what we know about the development history and kind of the basics of what's happened and all the delays. Let's move on to what we know about the story that will take place in this game. So we know the game will start with an event called the Mass Embrace, which is where new vampires are created, and this is where our playable character comes into the mix as one of the new vampires created on this night. Now, the mass changing is done without the approval of the major factions and clans, and our main character is brought to a court of higher vampires to explain to them what happened from our perspective. This would have led to our eventual execution because we weren't allowed to be turned into a vampire until the court is firebombed and our character escapes into Seattle to learn more about vampires in general and who is responsible for turning us into a vampire and the Mass Embrace itself. Now, as I said, the gameplay is set in Seattle and will include some fictional areas as well, such as a portion of Seattle that was destroyed in the 1800s, but they're actually going to act as if it never got destroyed and include it in-game. The team has also talked about a few of the side quests we will go on in the game. One larger side quest the team has highlighted is for our player to track down all the other Thin Bloods, which are a type of vampire I will get into later, that were created on the same night at the Mass Embrace as us. And we will learn more about how they are accepting this new life and powers. And the final piece of story information I want to touch on is the team has stated this game does take place in a slightly different timeline from the first game, but have teased that characters in the game might reference some events in the original game. So we aren't too sure what this means, but it sounds like it will be slightly different and won't overlap perfectly with the original. Next, let's talk about the protagonist. As for our character, we will get to fully customize how our character looks and the background of our character. We can even choose a job like a barista or police officer, and the team has promised many others. And even the job itself will impact the story and how different characters treat us. And choice, if you haven't noticed, will be a major aspect of this game and something the developers really wanted to focus on. Each decision and move will change how each player gets to experience the game and how the game ends and progresses forward. So as I said, we start as a thin blood vampire, which is a weaker vampire with limited powers. And during customization, we're kind of locked into this and we aren't able to join clans or factions, and that will actually happen later in the game and as our actions progress. Now, in terms of NPCs, the team has said that when our player needs to feed, we can use our vampiric sense to see players' resonance auras, which are based off the emotions of the NPCs themselves. Now, it's kind of a complex and weird mechanic, but they say that vampires don't naturally feel strong emotions, and the lore says that they get these emotions from the blood of individuals they feed on, which, depending on the color of auras on NPCs, can give various buffs to our player. And if a lot of one aura type of blood is fed on, it can give merit, which will greatly increase the power of our player. So there's a lot of ways to combine different auras, and what auras can lead to new powers depending on how we want to play the game. And the different types of resonance are delirium, desire, fear, pain, and rage, all of which will have their own color tied to them. The team states to make combinations, we will have to spend our time observing and tracking individuals with certain auras to get different type of resonance. But if you don't want to do any of that or play into that mechanic, you aren't required to feed on humans at all if you don't want to, and can just feed on animals like rats too. So the team has once again promised many choices in the way to play this game. Another aspect of the game we can touch on is the gameplay and combat. In the trailers shown off so far, we have seen a variety of melee weapons in the form of a baseball bat and machete. But for the most part, the team says that your vampire will be strong enough to fight with their own hands and you don't really need weapons. The team has also shown off a few firearms like a shotgun, and they've also said to expect a wide variety of weapons in game. But according to early reports, the gunplay will be slightly different than fans might expect. The report from Kotaku was from early 2019, so obviously everything is subject to change, but the report said that combat is more fluid than the original game, which is expected, but also went on to say that guns are treated as a temporary bonus in-game. You can pick up and grab guns, but once the ammo is out for that weapon, your character will disregard the gun completely. So don't expect to carry around a lot of weapons or constantly be using them. It will just be more you take a gun from someone, use it till it's up, throw it to the wayside, and keep moving. They've said that the game will be locked in first person, but there will be third person shifts during combat, and the camera will back up to show off special dodges or execution the player performs in third person rather than first person. But no, you will not be able to play the game in third person as of now. Another gameplay mechanic players will have to keep in mind is the humanity in Masquerade systems. Masquerade is basically the vow that vampires keep to keep their kind secret, and breaking the vow and showing people in the world that you have vampire powers will lead to consequences with the factions and clans. If our player performs too many cruel actions, such as sucking blood until NPCs die, it will decrease our humanity, and if we often reveal that we are a vampire, it will also decrease our reputation among other vampires, both of which will alter the dialogue and how the world adapts to these choices. There will also be two main types of areas in game. One type has been described as public areas, where vampire authorities watch us to make sure no one breaks the masquerade, so the player will be limited in what powers they want to use. And the other areas are blind spots, which allow the players to use their powers without breaking the masquerade, and are good areas for players to test their abilities and powers. As for gameplay itself, early reports have stated the game format feels similar to Dishonored and recent Deus Ex games. Players can often make their way throughout the game without having to kill anyone if they don't want to, and there will be multiple ways to tackle a single area. And the last real gameplay thing we can touch on is there will be different supernatural abilities that will vary depending on the clan the player chooses to side with. There will be 6 different clans that will be available for the player to join and work around throughout Bloodlines 2, and depending on the clan that the player chooses, it will impact the disciplines or powers that are available to the player. Now the first clan is the Thin Blood, which is what everyone will start out as. The player starts with minimal power, and the Thin Bloods normally do not survive very long in the world and are usually killed off early when they pose a threat to the masquerade. But it isn't impossible for Thin Bloods to work their way into the higher circles of vampire society. And the first available discipline is Chiropteran, which connects the player to bats. They are able to glide and gain extra mobility using bats, and the other ability allows the player to summon a swarm of bats to attack their enemies. The second discipline is called Mentalism, which allows the vampire to move objects using telekinesis. And the first ability in Mentalism allows the vampire to pull objects towards them from a distance, such as an obstacle or weapon. And the other ability allows them to levitate an NPC in air. And the final discipline that Thin Bloods can choose is Nebulation, which allows the player to connect with the mist. The first ability covers the player in mist and hides them for a short time, and the other ability envelops and covers the player in mist that damages NPC players as they touch it. And the second clan is called Bruja, who are the outcast and drifters in Seattle, and they are known for being a lot of the muscle in the vampire world and can even be purchased for hire by other vampire clans. And the first discipline if you join this clan is Potence, and that comes with the ability Fist of Cain, which is a powerful punch that can destroy walls or even throw back players through the air. And the other ability is called Earthshock. The player smashes the ground and damages and knocks down everyone who is near. You can also go into a second discipline called Celerity, which overall gives faster strikes, quicker dodges, and faster escapes. The first ability is called Unseen Storm and is a dash ability that moves the player forward and can even be combined with a dash attack. And the other ability is called Accelerate, which slows down the entire world and can allow for additional attacks or evasion depending on playstyle. The third clan is called the Tremere, who were never known for having large numbers in Seattle until recently and are a very knowledgeable and secretive clan. The first discipline is called Thaumaturgy, which is a blood sorcery. The first ability, Skewer, allows the player to create a patch of spikes that can damage enemies and bring back blood to the player. Another variation is called Purge, which makes their victims vomit blood and also brings that blood back to the player. And the final ability is called Blood Boil, which allows the player to cast Purge a second time and will make victims explode. Now if you want to go down a different route, the second discipline is called Auspex, and the first ability is called Aura Sense, which allows the player to view NPCs through walls and mark individuals for long distances if you're trying to track and hunt them. And you'll also be able to see enemy weak spots. And the second ability in this discipline is called Psychic Projection, which allows the player to detach their mind from their body and explore the area in astral form. The fourth clan is called the Toreador. The Toreador are a clan that is losing power in Seattle and are not as powerful as they used to be, and are mostly known for being artists. The first discipline is called Presence, and the first ability in Presence is called Awe, which allows you to freeze enemies and NPCs in place for a short time, and they will be oblivious to what they see after you use this ability for a few seconds. The other ability is called Entrance, which forms a group of admirers around the vampire and can cause distractions. The second discipline in this clan is called Celerity, which is an ability we have already covered, so it's the same exact thing, just you also get it in another clan. The fifth clan is called the Ventru. They are a richer faction who are mostly known from the industrial booms in the city, and they are a clan that keeps everyone following the Masquerade and set the culture of vampire society. The first discipline is called Dominate. First ability within that is called Mesmerize. It freezes one NPC in place and makes them oblivious to the entire world around them, even ignoring pain. The second ability is called Command, which expands on Memorize's power and allows the player to control the NPC to move, remove obstacles, and even attack. The second discipline is called Fortitude, and the first ability within that allows the player to take a defensive stance and deflect all attacks that they can see. And when they are attacked, they will instead heal from the damage. The second ability in this discipline is Personal Armor, which hardens the vampire's skin, allows them to become impervious to attacks, and instead attackers stumble back when attacking. And the final clan is the Malkalvian, who are one of the least powerful clans, and they are not really respected in the area, and they control few districts of little importance. The first discipline is Dementation, and the first ability within that is Haunt, which haunts a victim's mind and they will flee in panic, and the other ability is called Berserk, which fills a target's mind with rage and they will lash out at anyone visible. And the second discipline is Auspex, which is something we have already covered. And those are really all the clans and options players will have when playing Bloodlines 2. The team has also promised that more clans will be added post-launch for free to all players, so if you aren't really feeling any of these, you can expect more in the future. The next main group I want to talk about are the factions. They all want to control Seattle, and they are separate from the clans themselves, but players will get to decide what faction to join, cross, or pit against other factions, all of which will carry consequences in the world. The first faction is the Prisoners, who are credited with creating the vampire society in Seattle. They were the first to settle and rule in the land, but have let their power slowly decrease and are unhappy with the other factions who have been taking their power. And now mostly they control minor parts of the city, and their leader is Lou Grand. Throughout all of this, they have still remained one of the richest factions in the city. The second faction are the Camarilla, who are one of the most forward-thinking factions in tech and business, and they are led by Prince Cross, and they have used their business and wealth to take over control of the city, not just in terms of businesses, but also politicians. The next faction is the Baron, which is a very hidden faction, where very few vampires have ever met the Baron himself, and the main force that makes up this faction is from the defiant and desperate in the city. One of the main lieutenants is Josephine, and the faction of the Baron is usually avoided unless another faction needs some dirty work done. But then at that point, if you use the Baron, you are now in debt to him. And the fourth faction are the Newcomers. The leader of the Newcomers is Professor Victor Goga, and promises security and blood to all those who follow him, and the Baron sees the newcomers as his biggest threat. The group was founded by blood mages, and they are said to know more about the true potential of vampires than any other faction. And the final faction is the Unseen. The faction is made up of drifters and homeless of the city, which is how they are able to hide in plain sight without breaking the Masquerade. They are led by the Council of Three to Nosferatu, and mostly remain unnoticed by the major factions as well, but they are one of the most knowledgeable about the inner workings of the city, and are said to be one of the greatest allies in the city, but the biggest challenge is finding them. If we move on to platforms the player can expect this title on, originally the game was announced for the last generation of consoles, so the PS4 and Xbox One along with PC, but the team recently revealed a next generation trailer, and with that announced the game would be coming to the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, along with the last generation of consoles and PC. The team has also said at the time of recording the game will not be an Epic Store exclusive, and the game will also not have any loot boxes, all of which are pretty big benefits to the customer. So what should fans expect in the coming year? Well, I would definitely expect the release of the game. The team has finally announced different versions of the game that are available for purchase, like the standard, deluxe, collectors, and so on. And I see a 2021 release date certain because of that fact, and I doubt they would delay until 2022. The only news that sort of muddies the water around a release date is the fact that Vampire the Masquerade Battle Royale was announced for a release in the latter half of 2021, which to me seems like it could confuse the general audience and seems like a strange marketing move for the franchise. If both of these games launch around the same time, a lot of fans could just write off Bloodlines 2 as a battle royale when that's really not the case and they're two separate properties, so maybe they know more than we do. Now, the game has what seems to be like a placeholder release date currently on most retailers of March 31st, 2021, which is the end of the fiscal year quarter. But I wouldn't be out of the question for an early 2021 release, and to me that seems like the most logical release date if the game is ready. The game could avoid Cyberpunk and some of the big holiday releases, but they'd also be earlier enough before the Battle Royale launch too, so I would say if I were to launch this game and if it was done, closer to the beginning of 2021 rather than later, which would clear the way for the Battle Royale and for whatever else the team has planned. So that's what I would hope for the franchise. And for the most part, that is everything we know about Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. Make sure to like and share this video, subscribe for weekly gaming news, and I will see you guys in the next one.